Hello, I'm Jennifer Branch, and today I'm going to paint one of the most beautiful lighthouses you've ever seen, Pumpkin Island Lighthouse. And not only a lighthouse, but there's a dog and a boat too. So let's paint. I'm using twin rocker paper and just starting with a light wash using a mop brush because I want it pretty loose. There's a lot of detail and interesting tiny little things on this photograph, as you can tell, so I have to really slap my hand a bit to restrict it to just the essentials. I don't want more detail in it than is necessary to say what I want to say, which is beautiful day, dog welcoming rower home. It's a lovely scene. This is very simple. I love scenes that just make you smile. Now notice here my palette, I am mixing a bunch of colors together. So when I'm popping the colors up on the screen, they're just going to be the ones, that's the primary color in the mix. So cobalt blue, cobalt violet, I'm using some nickel azo yellow, quin rust, and most of the painting is just combinations of those. You notice how when it's squared in the clump there, it doesn't look that much different. Like there's a lot of nuances in the blues or the browns. There's quite a difference in how they behave. So just practice. There's that sparkle on the water that's so lovely there. So I'm just doing it very hesitantly. I'm using a squirrel here, so it's very hit and miss. It's twin rocker cold press paper, not rough press, so you have to work a little for the hit and miss, but there is enough texture to get it. I'm using cobalt violet. It's not a bright blue sky, sunny day sort of thing, and I'm using a little bit of that to dull it down. Now I'm remembering as I'm doing the foreground water and the reflections that there's some trees up above there, and I want to go ahead and paint those reflections into it a tiny bit. Cobalt blue. I'm deciding, yes, I do want to just go over the dog and the person because this is all very light and sparkly. So it's not going to distract. A little bit more of the cobalt blue dulled by the cobalt violet. Now here, I really don't want to use much gouache on this because it is a very light painting. It's not heavy overcast, and there's also, it's not really a bright day with a bright blue sky and a heavy sparkle, if you know what I mean. This is all very effervescent. So I want to use as much of the white of the paper as I can. So that means if it takes a scratch piece of and testing your brush strokes, do it. Now it's not a big deal. That's what the backs of paintings are for. Actually, until recently, the backs of my paintings were for the backs for more paintings. So now I use them for lessons. This is a full painting though. So go right over the people, don't worry about it. That's going to integrate them better into the painting so they don't look like two little cutouts. Now the water is I'm going to bleed some in, but I also want to let some dry in waves and do it in a couple layers. So it's going to be a combination of bleeding it like this and then more layers later on. So always know what you're doing for the next step or two. That way you don't cover up something you really should have left white or paint something a color that you weren't planning on. The underpainting matters in watercolor. And notice how I always work around the painting. You don't want to just do one tiny area, then another tiny area, and you'll end up with a painting that looks like, well, it looks like a collage, which is great if you're going for that look, but if you're not. So I've started some of the greens with some of the nickel azo yellow and a touch of cobalt teal. And I'm still wanting it fairly loose. I'm going to go back for more detail on the trees, but first stage, pretty loose. I want some of the very warm, yellowy green in there. They're heavy, dark, evergreen trees, but I want some of the lighter colors first for the underpainting. Can't you just smell the balsam? It's just wonderful. This is the most beautiful little lighthouse. Leave lots of white for the grass there. It's kind of it isn't really grass, it's just a scrub, but it's a very bright green compared to everything else. So you want to leave a lot of white for the sparkle. It's just beautiful. I've painted this, I don't even know how many times, if you're counting sketches. I think I've done 3 real paintings of it. And it's just a lovely lighthouse. It's over on an island, so I generally paint the same view of it because it's the one you can get from the public road. There's a wonderful, on Deer Isle, there's a wonderful little turnaround area that you can picnic and bring your sketching supplies and just have a wonderful hour or two sketching. So I've done that quite a bit. I think I do it every time I go to Maine. It's just a charming lighthouse. And there's usually people sailing or rowing. It's fun. See, I'm already thinking about the dog's reflection too before the dog is painted. Quinacridone rust. So there's kind of a red theme running through this painting. I've got the quinacridone rust, and I'll be throwing in some cadmium red, and it's just kind of a red thread running through it. And you'll see more of that because the dog is the reddish color, and the person's jacket is red, and this little shed is red. And it's good to have an accent color like that you keep the same throughout the painting. It creates one mood. You can have lots of different colors going through, and that creates another type of mood. But this is very simple, very lovely day, very peaceful. So you don't want to do a lot of accent colors. I'm sticking with the same small palette and then the bright reds or dulled reds in this case. Okay, so I've gone into the trees and they are fun. The fir trees up there, they smell so good. Always keep looking at what you're doing. You want to keep in mind what you're painting and the mood that you want and all the sketches you've done of the subject. And I usually have sketches laid out, my iPad with the picture, and sometimes, I steal another iPad from a family member for the other picture and, reference photos like crazy. Okay, so I'm not scrubbing too much, but I'm using a fairly dry brush, but it's wet enough to get a nice point because I do want nice little tips on those branches. And I start with the lighter colors and then I go over them, the lighter yellower colors, really, more nickel azo yellow. And I go over them with a heavier mix of quinacridone rust and ultramarine blue. So the combination of those, when it's wet, they're going to bleed together nicely. It's going to be lovely. And just up to the top. So this isn't the center of interest, it's more framing the rest of the center of interest. It's redirecting your attention, so you don't want it too much detail. And really, to me, that's the hardest part of painting, is learning which details are important and which you should leave out. Now notice how the brush is doing. See, I'm pulling up, and this is a sable, so it's very springy, and I'm just hit and miss and leave some of this. So now I've done most of the trees, and it's time to work on the roof. And that's still just a cobalt violet, cobalt blue, touch of rust. The same sort of semi-dry brush for the rocks, because I want that rough rock texture, but the strokes are very different. And notice how when you're working with the strokes, that completely changes what the object you're painting looks like. So a little bit of dry brush. Now it's time for the boat and dog, or at least the start of them. So this is really where I want the detail, is the boat and the dog, which is why I've left it till I've done most of the painting around everywhere else underneath it for sure. And it's a difficult one because I want to do every single little line on the lighthouse, but that's not really my center of interest in this particular painting of Pumpkin Island Lighthouse. It's the dog welcoming his owner. And the interaction there, which is why I moved the boat a little bit closer to the dog. Just a better little triangle and direction there. Never be scared to move things around in a painting, especially something like a boat that moves anyways. Put it where you want it for the effect that you're going for, and you want to direct the viewer's attention where you want it to go. You don't want it dodging all over the painting and falling out. So a little bit of red there with the quin rust. And I'm still using a fairly large brush here. Some brighter reds for the dog. A little bit closer on the dog. Because after all, the dog's always the star of the show, right? So I'm starting with the golds just like I did up above in the grass, but a little bit darker. I wanted the nickel azo yellow for the golden layers there, and then some quin rust over it. I'm just barely touching it with the tip of the brush. This is tricky because, once again, I don't want, it is the star of the show and center of interest, but I don't want too much detail. And if I start painting it with the dinky little brush, I'm going to lose the interesting gaps and odd little effects. So I want to start with the big brush and then go to a smaller one, because it is obviously going to require a smaller one. So know about dogs. You know, you might do a little sketch of just a dog, or whatever animal you're doing, and just think about the body in terms of like large shapes, you know. We're not looking for every hair in this because this is a 10 by 14 painting, so it's still pretty small. We're looking for large shapes. And notice most of the painting I've been back on the wooden handle of the brush, and here I'm just way up at the top and just holding on to that ferrule choked in as much as I can. So that tells you that does a tiny little brush stroke in comparison, because you can't sweep with your elbow as well. I switched to the rigger. So you're choking up on a brush when you're wanting tiny little detail. You move back to the tip when you want big shapes. And this is just a tiny, tiny rigger. But if I had started with that, you know, or just had that, so I have the two brushes going here, it would have been too much. See, the dog is still pretty small relative to the size of the painting. And obviously the detail areas take the longest. And I did want to do my center of interest detail before too much detail in the lighthouse, because that way I'd be able to gauge how much detail I wanted on the lighthouse. Now some cad red for that, you know, that thread of red going through it. And just little touches that don't necessarily show up that much, but do make a difference. There's a lot of subtleties in painting that direct your eye to one place or another. For instance, this oar, that helps frame that little area. And she kind of needs the oar either way, so you might as well use it, right? And notice I'm back to the bigger brush. You know, you don't want to stay with the dinky brush for long, any longer than you absolutely have to. Now the human face, I actually went a little less detail than I put in the dog. I just went kind of a blur there. It's wearing a baseball cap and just out for a row. Such a wonderful thing to do in the summer. And here's the red showing up again. I've done a lot more kayaking and canoeing than rowing. It does look like a lot of fun. I can't wait till my kids are old enough to bring some kayaks up to Maine next time we go. Now, just so much detail, you know, you just want the highlights and the shadows and blur it a little because this is not crisp. You know, you're not looking for a crisp painting. But you want to get the basic highlights and shadows and shapes right, because it isn't about the detail, it's about the silhouette and the big shapes of a human figure when it's this kind of distance. Your mind will fill in details if the outline's correct. I have to say, for something like this where you need a touch of dry brush and a touch of wet and wet and the combination of it, twin rocker paper is just, it's a pleasure to paint on. It's really good for this kind of thing. Okay, so my palette at this point is a mess. You can see how many colors I've used. Now I'm trying for just enough detail. See, I left all the details. I kind of left the bold outline. You know, it's got a roof, that kind of stuff. There's some basic shadows. So it wasn't just a big white blank, which would then throw the other part off. But now that I know how much detail is going to be on the figures, I can work on the detail on the lighthouse. Little door right there. Maybe a little porch. You know, this looks wonderful during the summer, but oh my goodness, it'd be cold during the winter, wouldn't it? Those poor lighthouse keepers. A bit more detail, and I'm just using the same color combinations. The cobalt teal, the cobalt blue. See, it's all just mixed hodgepodge. You do want to mix a lot on your paper, not just on your palette. It's really important that you don't leave all the mixing on your palette. That's where you get this spontaneous quality of watercolor. If everything's pre-mixed, you're it gets a bit dull. So rigor for just some hairlines for that railing, because it has to be there or it doesn't look right, but you don't want too much. So a lot of dry brush, hit and miss, and that a itty bitty little rigger that doesn't, in fairly dry paint is perfect. And I wanted you to see just how much detail I put into something like the railing. Oh, and by the way, the painting took about 2 hours, not including drying time. So that gives you an estimate, because I do end up cropping out, whatever seems like we've done it before or unimportant. Actually, I hate cropping stuff out, but it has to be done, otherwise it'd be too long for you to watch, right? This one ended up a bit longer because I wanted you to see exactly how much went into details and how much didn't go into it too. All right, so you see it's just kind of a mix. This is mostly cobalt blue and the Quin Rust for a little bit of dark. I've got some ultramarine and the darker mix of that as well. So you can see how much I care about details by exactly where my hand is on that rigger. It's not choked up at the ferrule, but it's not way back like I would for tree limbs either. Just a touch of shadow so you can see that these, it gives a little bit of depth to it. And you want that bit of depth. Under the eaves. And that way that keeps it from blurring into each other. And it would have that very, very dark shadow under there. But hit and miss just like the railings. Blurring the tree just very slightly into the shadow area there. The little bit of molding above the windows, and that's it. A beautiful day, Pumpkin Island Lighthouse. Thank you so much for painting with me today. I hope this inspires you to paint your own lighthouses and your docks. So if you have any questions, just visit my website, paintingwatercolor.com, and it has all the materials, art supplies that you'll need, list, and the reference photo, because that's a little bit helpful if you don't have a lighthouse that's near. If you like this video, please subscribe. I'd love to have you join our painting group. Happy painting!